was living a different life entirely. A life of secret luxury, passion, and betrayal in the most romantic city in the world. He thought he was invisible, untouchable. He didn't count on one thing, a single seemingly innocent photo posted for the world to see, that would become the first domino in the complete and utter destruction of his life and career. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of a meticulously planned downfall. The silence in the Vanderbilt penthouse was a living entity. It breathed in the filtered air circulating through the vents and settled over the plush, cream-colored carpets like a fine layer of dust. For Genevieve Vanderbilt, this silence had become the soundtrack to her life for the past 7 weeks. From her position propped up by a mountain of silk pillows on their custom-built bed, she had a perfect panoramic view of Central Park. The leaves were beginning to blush with the first hints of autumn, a vibrant spectacle of life and change that felt a world away from the static, climate-controlled stillness of her room. She was 28 weeks pregnant, a milestone that should have been celebrated with joy and anticipation. Instead, it was marked by a diagnosis of severe placenta. Previa a cruel twist of biology that had turned her body into a beautiful but treacherous prison. The doctors had been unequivocal complete bed rest. No exceptions. Any undue strain, any sudden movement could trigger a catastrophic hemorrhage, endangering both her and the baby. So she lay here, a Rapunzel in a glass tower, surrounded by every conceivable luxury, and yet utterly captive. Her days were a structured monotony of nurse visits, blood pressure checks, and the quiet turning of pages in art history. Tomes a nod to her former life as a rising curator at the Met, a life that now felt like a distant dream. Arthur Vanderbilt. Her husband was a man carved from ambition and confidence. At 42, he was the titan behind Vandercorp Global, a real estate development firm that didn't just build skyscrapers, but reshaped city skylines. He moved through the world with an unshakable certainty that it would bend to his will, and for the most part, it did. He saw her bed rest not as a medical crisis, but as a logistical problem to be managed. He'd hired the best private nursing staff, ensured the finest meals were delivered from Daniel Boulud's kitchen, and had the penthouse's smart home system recalibrated so she could control everything from a tablet by her bedside. He believed he had solved the problem. "Everything comfortable, darling?" he asked, striding into the bedroom. He was already dressed in a tailored Tom Ford suit, the dark charcoal wool accentuating his powerful frame. The scent of his Creed Aventus cologne preceded him, a familiar aroma that used to comfort her, but now just smelled of departure. He placed his briefcase on a velvet bench at the foot of the bed. "As comfortable as one can be," Genevieve replied, offering a wan smile. She traced a pattern on the duvet cover. "The nurse just left. My blood pressure is stable. The baby was kicking up a storm earlier. I think he's going to be a soccer player." Arthur chuckled a deep, resonant sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. A Vanderbilt has to aim higher than that. He'll own the team, not play for it. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, his lips cool and brief. It was a gesture of ownership, not intimacy. "I have to go, Jen. The jet's waiting at Teterboro. This summit in Geneva is crucial. The refinancing of the Dubai Tower depends on it." Geneva. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. He had mentioned it for weeks. Meetings with Swiss bankers, presentations, transatlantic negotiations. It all sounded so plausible, so... "Arthur." "Of course," she said, her voice soft. "How long will you be gone this time?" 4 days. 5 at the most. David will be here in the city managing things, and Sophie is coming to stay with you tomorrow, isn't she? Genevieve nodded. The thought of her younger sister Sophie was a small, bright spot in the oppressive grey. Sophie was her anchor to reality, the one person who wasn't on Arthur's payroll. Yes, she'll be here after her classes. Good. That's good. He glanced at his Patek Philippe watch, a 50th anniversary gift from his board of directors. I have to run. I'll call you the moment I land. I love you. The words were correct, the delivery flawless, but lately they felt like another line item on his daily checklist. Kiss pregnant wife. Check. Say I love you, check. Board private jet to betray her, check. She didn't know that last part for a fact, of course. It was just a feeling, a sort of creeping dread that had taken root in the pit of her stomach over the past few months. It was the hushed phone calls he took in his study, the new uncharacteristic password on his personal laptop, the emotional distance that had grown into a chasm between them. I love you too, she whispered as he turned and walked out of the room. The heavy bedroom door clicked shut, and the silence rushed back in heavier than before. She picked up her tablet, scrolling idly through her social media feeds. It was a window to the world she was missing: friends getting engaged, colleagues opening new exhibits, the simple mundane joy of people walking their dogs in the park she could only view from above. She felt a profound sense of isolation, a loneliness so acute it was a physical ache. She loved the baby inside her with a fierce, protective passion. He was her everything, her reason for enduring this gilded imprisonment. And she had loved Arthur too. She had been dazzled by his drive, his intelligence, his grand vision of the world. But she was beginning to fear that in his world she was just another beautiful acquisition, like the Monet in the hallway, or the penthouse itself. And now, as she lay there, vulnerable and dependent, she suspected his gaze was already wandering, searching for a new, shinier prize. The low thrum of a helicopter passed by the window, likely heading for the downtown heliport. She imagined Arthur inside, soaring above the city, already forgetting the still silent woman he'd left behind in his sky palace, waiting for a son he saw as a legacy and for a husband who was flying toward a lie. Paris in the autumn wasn't just a city, it was a sensory experience. The air, crisp and cool, carried the scent of roasting chestnuts and damp earth from the Tuileries garden. The late afternoon sun cast a golden, syrupy light on the Haussmannian buildings, making the city glow as if from within. For Arthur Vanderbilt, however, the city's beauty was merely a backdrop, an expensive stage set for his own personal drama. His Gulfstream G650 had landed at Le Bourget, not Geneva Cointron. There were no Swiss bankers, no refinancing summits. There was only Katerina Petrova. He watched her now as she stood on the balcony of their suite at the Four Seasons George V. It wasn't the presidential suite. That would be too conspicuous a detail his meticulous mind had noted. This was a premier suite, opulent and breathtaking, but one tier down. Katerina, or Kat, as she insisted her followers call her, was 24 years old, with the kind of lithe, restless energy that made Genevieve's calm elegance seem almost matronly in comparison. She was a social media influencer, a profession Arthur found both vacuous and fascinatingly powerful. They had met at a charity gala 6 months ago, and the attraction had been immediate and combustible. She turned from the balcony, a flute of Krug champagne in her hand, her phone in the other. Isn't this just... Everything she sighed, her eyes wide, with a practiced sincerity, he knew she used for her online audience. She was filming, of course. Not him, never him. That was the first and most important rule. But she filmed the view of the Eiffel Tower, the marble bathroom, the ridiculously large bouquet of white peonies he'd had waiting for her. "It's adequate," Arthur replied, loosening his tie. He was observing her, the way she framed every shot, the way her thumb hovered over the post button. He found her ambition alluring. She was a creature of the modern age, building a brand out of thin air and curated moments. Adequate. "Arthur." "This is a dream," she pouted, walking over to him and draping her arms around his neck. "Our dream." He smiled a genuine smile this time. With Katerina, everything was simple. She wanted what he could provide, luxury access, a proximity to power that she could then monetize through her posts. In return, she offered him an escape. She was uncomplicated, demanding in a way that was transactional, not emotional. She didn't speak of legacies or blood pressure. She spoke of follower counts and brand collaborations. She made him feel young and untethered, a feeling he hadn't realized he'd been missing until he found it with her. For the next 2 days they were ghosts in the city, living a life of sybaritic excess. They dined late at L'Ambroisie in the Place des Vosges, a place so exclusive and discreet he felt safe. They had a private tour of the Musée Rodin, after hours a favor called in from a contact at the Ministry of Culture. He bought her a Cartier bracelet on the Place Vendôme, watching with detached amusement as her eyes lit up. Each experience was immediately yet subtly translated into content for her Instagram feed. A shot of 2 champagne glasses, a close-up of the new bracelet on her wrist, resting on the restaurant's linen tablecloth, a blurry artistic photo of the museum's garden at night. She was clever, he had to give her that. She never showed his face or tagged him. She used vague aspirational captions. Parisian nights in a dream. Feeling so blessed, it was enough to incite envy and speculation among her followers, but nothing that could ever be traced back to him. He was a phantom in her narrative, a powerful benefactor whose identity was her most valuable secret. Meanwhile, in New York, Genevieve was sinking into a deeper state of unease. Arthur's calls were brief, filled with fabricated details about his meetings. His voice was distant, distracted. She could hear the faint sound of traffic when he claimed to be in a boardroom, the clinking of glasses when he said he was turning in for the night. She didn't challenge him. What could she say? "My intuition tells me you're lying." He would dismiss it as hormonal paranoia, the anxieties of a high-risk pregnancy. He would make her feel foolish. Her sister Sophie arrived like a force of nature, her bright, pragmatic energy cutting through the penthouse's oppressive quiet. She took one look at Genevieve's pale face and the untouched lunch on her bedside table, and her expression hardened. He called, Sophie asked, her tone devoid of pleasantries. "This morning, he said the negotiations are intense." Genevieve replied, her gaze fixed on the park below. "I bet they are," Sophie muttered, unpacking a bag of contraband snacks, sour candies and salty chips that the nurses would have certainly vetoed. "Jen, you need to stop protecting him. You know something is wrong. I can see it in your eyes. Knowing and proving are 2 different things, Soph. Right now, I have to protect the baby. Stress is the enemy." The conversation was cut short by a notification on Genevieve's tablet. A friend had tagged her in the comments of a post. With a sigh, she tapped the link. The screen filled with an image from an account she didn't follow. Cat Loves Life. It was a young, stunningly beautiful woman, posing on a Parisian balcony. The Eiffel Tower glittered in the background. The caption read, "Woke up in the city of love. Some girls have all the luck." Genevieve felt a slight pang of envy, but nothing more until her eyes snagged on a detail in the photo's reflection. The woman was holding a phone, and in the dark screen, a faint image was mirrored. It was the interior of a hotel room, and in that reflection, a man's arm, clad in a familiar dark grey suit sleeve, was visible resting on a chair. It was nothing. It could be anyone. She was about to swipe away when another post from the same account caught her eye. This one posted an hour earlier. A story that would disappear in 24 hours. It was a close-up shot of her own manicured hand, adorned with a new Cartier bracelet, resting next to a man's hand on a white tablecloth. The man's hand was strong, his fingers long, and on his wrist was a watch. Genevieve's breath hitched. Her heart began to pound against her ribs, a frantic trapped bird. She zoomed in her own hand, trembling slightly. The face of the watch was unmistakable. The deep blue dial, the steel bezel, the unique clasp. It was Arthur's Patek Philippe, the one he was wearing when he left. Her world, which had felt still and stagnant, suddenly tilted violently on its axis. The air in the room grew thin. She clicked back to the first photo, the one on the balcony. She zoomed in on the reflection again, her mind racing. The view from that balcony, the angle of the Eiffel Tower, the specific Haussmannian roof lines visible across the street. She had seen it before. 2 years ago, for their first anniversary, Arthur had taken her to Paris. They had stayed at the Four Seasons George V. They had stood on a very similar balcony in a premier suite and had taken a photo almost identical to this one. Geneva. The lie was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact rendered in high-definition pixels and broadcast to 250,000 followers. He wasn't in meetings with bankers. He was in Paris. With her. And this woman, this at Cat Love's life, was wearing her life, staying in her hotel and touching her husband. Sophie watched the color drain from her sister's face. "Jen, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." Genevieve turned the tablet toward her sister, her finger pointing at the watch on the screen. She couldn't speak. She didn't have to. Sophie's sharp intake of breath was all the confirmation she needed. The betrayal was no longer a phantom. It had a name, a face, and an Instagram account. The initial shock hit Genevieve like a physical blow, leaving her breathless and disoriented. The gilded cage of her penthouse bedroom suddenly felt claustrophobic, the walls closing in. For a long moment, she just stared at the screen, at the smiling face of the woman, and the undeniable proof of Arthur's presence. Her mind scrambled for an alternative explanation, a rationalization that could stitch her reality back together. Maybe he'd lent the watch to a colleague. Maybe the hotel suite was just a coincidence. Maybe... "Don't," Sophie said, her voice firm but gentle. She took the tablet from Genevieve's shaking hands. "Don't you dare make excuses for him. Not this time." Sophie's words sliced through the fog of denial. The cold, hard truth settled in Genevieve's chest, heavy and painful. He was with another woman. While she lay here, her body dedicated to the singular, fragile task of keeping their child safe, he was in Paris, living a second life. The cruelty of it was staggering, a bottomless void of disrespect. The heartbreak came first, a wave of grief so powerful it felt like it might break her. Tears she hadn't even realized were forming began to stream down her face, silent and hot. They were tears for the man she thought she had married, for the future she believed they were building, for the trust that had just been irrevocably shattered. Sophie sat on the edge of the bed, wrapping an arm around her sister's shoulders. She didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. She just sat with her, a solid, unwavering presence in the wreckage. "What do I do?" Genevieve whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't even get out of this bed. I'm trapped. Right now, you do nothing but breathe." Sophie said, her eyes scanning the Instagram profile on the tablet. "We need to be smart. He thinks he's invincible. He thinks you're isolated and helpless. We're going to use that." Sophie, a law student with a mind like a steel trap, immediately shifted into strategic mode. She began taking screenshots of everything: the balcony photo with the reflection, the story with the watch older posts that hinted at expensive gifts or trips. She scrolled through the woman's tagged photos, her followers, the comments. It was a digital breadcrumb trail of an affair conducted with arrogant carelessness. Katerina Petrova. Sophie read aloud. 250,000 followers. She's not just some girl, Jen. She's a brand, and she's using Arthur to build it. Over the next few hours, with Sophie as her hands and feet, Genevieve began her own quiet investigation. Her background as a curator had trained her to see details others missed, to understand provenance and context. She applied that same rigorous methodology to deconstructing her husband's betrayal. "The bracelet," Genevieve said, her voice gaining a sliver of its former strength. "The one in the picture. Let's look at the Cartier website. I want to know the collection." She guided Sophie through the site. There, the Juste un Clou collection. The small model pink gold diamonds. She knew Arthur's tastes. He always went for the popular, flashy choice, the one that screamed its own value. They cross-referenced the restaurant, the distinct V-shaped back of the dining chairs in one of Kat's photos. A quick search of exclusive Paris restaurants confirmed it: L'Ambroisie. Genevieve's heart twisted. He had taken her there once, years ago, and told her it was their place. The pain was still there, a raw, open wound. But something else was beginning to stir beneath it, a cold, clear rage. It was the rage of a woman who had been underestimated, disrespected, and made a fool of. Arthur hadn't just cheated on her. He had mocked her confinement. He had flaunted his freedom while she was imprisoned by a medical condition he treated as an inconvenience. The final piece of evidence, the one that would extinguish the last embers of her grief and ignite a full-blown inferno, came the next day. Katerina, emboldened by Arthur's indulgence, or perhaps growing impatient with her role as a secret, made a mistake. A fatal one. She posted a new photo. It was a selfie taken at a corner table of a sun-drenched cafe, a plate of perfect macarons in front of her. She was beaming, looking off to the side at someone. And reflected in the curved silver surface of the sugar dispenser on the table was the distorted but utterly recognizable face of the man she was looking at. It was Arthur. His brow was furrowed slightly as he read something on his phone, but it was him. The sharp line of his jaw, the silvering at his temples, the confident set of his mouth. Katerina had even tagged the location Carrette in the Place des Trocadero. Sophie saw the post first. She took a deep breath and turned the tablet to Genevieve. "The nail in the coffin," she said quietly. Genevieve looked at the image. She saw Arthur's face, not looking at her, not concerned for her or their child, but completely absorbed in his other life. And in that moment, the heartbroken wife vanished. In her place stood the Vanderbilt heiress, the woman whose name was on the deed to this penthouse, whose pre-nuptial agreement was famously ironclad, and whose intelligence her husband had so grossly underestimated. Her tears were gone. Her eyes were dry and clear. "He didn't just lie to me, Sophie," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "He put our baby at risk. The stress, the shock. It could have triggered something terrible. He chose a fling in Paris over the safety of his own son. That is unforgivable." She looked out the window at the city below, at the empire Arthur had built. An empire built on an image of strength, stability and family values, an image he carefully curated for his investors and the board of Vandercorp Global. He values his company, his reputation, more than anything. Genevieve continued, her mind already working, fitting pieces together. He thinks his money and power make him untouchable. He's about to find out how wrong he is. "What are you going to do?" Sophie asked, seeing a new, formidable light in her sister's eyes. Genevieve picked up her personal phone from the bedside table, scrolling through her contacts. She bypassed the celebrity divorce lawyers, the ones who would leak details to the press for a quick, messy settlement. She needed someone more precise. A surgeon, not a butcher. She found the name she was looking for. Annalise Dubois. A corporate litigator known for her discretion, her razor-sharp intellect, and her utter ruthlessness in the boardroom. She wasn't a family lawyer, but this was no longer a family matter. This was a corporate takedown. First, Genevieve said, her finger hovering over the call button, "I'm going to hire a very, very good lawyer." And then she looked at Sophie, a chillingly serene smile on her lips. "I'm going to burn his kingdom to the ground." Annalise Dubois was not what one expected from a lawyer known as the Shark of Park Avenue. She was a petite woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of quiet authority. She arrived at the Vanderbilt penthouse the following afternoon, not with a leather briefcase, but with a simple, elegant Hermès handbag. She listened without interruption as Genevieve propped against her pillows and with Sophie by her side laid out the entire story. She reviewed the screenshots, her expression unreadable. "Your prenuptial agreement is robust, Mrs. Vanderbilt," Annalise said when Genevieve had finished her voice, a calm, measured contralto. "It was designed to protect Mr. Vanderbilt's existing assets. However, it contains a standard infidelity clause, which we can certainly leverage. But you're not just interested in a favorable divorce settlement, are you, no?" Genevieve said, her gaze steady. "A divorce settlement is money. Money is not what he values most. He values his name, his power, his position as the untouchable CEO of Vandercorp. I want that taken away from him." Annalise allowed herself a small, approving smile. A much more interesting challenge. To achieve that, we cannot be the aggressors. You, Mrs. Vanderbilt, must remain above the fray. The victim. The dignified, suffering wife. The narrative is everything. And so the plan was born. A plan of surgical precision, designed not for maximum noise, but for maximum impact. The first step was silence. Genevieve did not call Arthur. She did not confront him, rage at him, or give him any indication that she knew. She answered his brief nightly calls from Geneva with a voice that was tired but placid. She spoke of the baby, the nurse's reports, the changing leaves in the park. Her calm unnerved him more than any accusation would have. He was expecting hysterics. Her serenity was a puzzle he couldn't solve. The second step was the leak. This was Annalise's masterstroke. They would not go to the tabloids. That was messy, undignified. Instead, Annalise activated her own network. She had a discreet conversation with a senior editor at the Wall Street Journal, a man who owed her a significant favor. She didn't mention the affair directly. Instead, she framed it as a matter of corporate governance and shareholder risk. There are whispers, Annalise had said over an espresso at a private club, that Arthur Vanderbilt's judgment has become erratic, that he is making reckless personal decisions that could impact the stability of Vandercorp. For instance, abandoning his high-risk pregnant wife to jet-set around Europe for non-essential reasons. A man whose heir is in a medically fragile situation should be a pillar of stability. His investors might see this kind of behavior as a red flag. It was the perfect angle. It wasn't about sex. It was about stability. It wasn't gossip. It was a question of fiduciary duty. Simultaneously, Genevieve made a single calculated phone call. She called Eleanor Finch, the 70-year-old matriarch of a New York banking dynasty, and the most influential member of the charity board on which Genevieve had served before her pregnancy. Eleanor was the city's moral compass, a woman whose quiet disapproval could wither a reputation overnight. Eleanor Genevieve's voice was soft, laced with a genuine weariness. "I'm afraid I have to tender my resignation from the board, effective immediately. Given my delicate situation here, I don't feel I have the focus the foundation deserves." "My dear girl, we understand completely," Eleanor boomed. "You just focus on that baby. Is that husband of yours taking good care of you? I trust he's not leaving your side for a moment." Genevieve paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a fraction of a second too long. "Arthur is managing an urgent crisis in Europe," she said, her voice catching almost imperceptibly. "He is doing what he feels is best for the company." It was all Eleanor needed. The unspoken implication was deafening. The dignified suffering had begun. The first tremor hit 2 days later. It wasn't a tabloid exposes, but a short, sharp piece in the Wall Street Journal's influential business column. It didn't mention Katerina Petrova or the affair. It simply questioned Arthur Vanderbilt's recent erratic travel schedule and notable absence from the city at a time of personal family crisis, posing the question, is Vandercorp's CEO losing focus? The article was a dog whistle to the financial world. The board members of Vandercorp started calling each other. The company's stock dipped by 2 points. It wasn't a crash, but it was a warning shot. The real explosion came from an unexpected direction. A popular anonymous gossip account on Instagram, one followed by journalists, celebrities, and socialites, suddenly posted a side-by-side collage. On one side was the WSJ article's headline. On the other was Katerina Petrova's selfie from the Parisian cafe, the one with Arthur's reflection. The caption was simple, "Connect the dots." Someone had. The information seeded at the highest levels had trickled down and cross-pollinated with the digital evidence. Now the story had a face. The internet did the rest. Within hours, the narrative was everywhere. It was no longer just about an irresponsible CEO. It was about a billionaire who took his influencer mistress to Paris, while his gravely ill pregnant wife was on bed rest. Bloggers, news outlets, and social media commentators tore the story apart. Katerina's Instagram was flooded with vitriol. Her carefully curated brand of aspirational living was instantly rebranded as home-wrecking. In Paris, the world caved in on Arthur and Katerina. His phone began to melt down with calls from his COO David Chen, from panicked board members, from his PR team. He saw the headlines, the Instagram posts, his own face reflected in that damnable silver sugar dispenser. "What did you do?" he roared at Katerina, who was crying hysterically in the corner of the hotel suite that now felt like a prison. "I didn't do anything. I was careful," she sobbed. "It's not my fault." But it was. Her insatiable need for content, Her reckless post had provided the visual proof that turned a corporate rumor into a human drama of monstrous proportions. Arthur's first instinct was to control, to fix. He called his PR team and ordered them to kill the story. But it was too big, too viral. It was a wildfire, and he had handed Katerina the match. He called Genevieve. For the first time, his call went directly to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. A cold dread, colder than anything he had felt in a boardroom, began to creep up his spine. She knew. Of course she knew. And her silence was the most terrifying response of all. He booked the jet, telling Katerina to pack her things. The dream was over. As he stood on the balcony, looking out at the glittering city, he finally understood. This wasn't a random media storm. The Wall Street Journal piece, the timing, the narrative, it was too precise, too strategic. This was a controlled demolition. And he knew with sickening certainty that the architect of his ruin was the one person he had left behind, the woman he had assumed was powerless lying in that quiet, silent room, thousands of miles away. The return to New York was a descent into hell. The moment Arthur Vanderbilt's Gulf Stream touched down at Teterboro, the fortress of his invincibility crumbled. There were no fawning assistants waiting on the tarmac. Only a single grim-faced driver holding a tablet with a message from David Chen, the COO of Vandercorp. Do not go to the penthouse. Go directly to the office. The board has convened an emergency session. He left Katerina at the airport, barely giving her a second glance. Her tear-streaked face and pleas of "what about us" were nothing more than irritating background noise. She was the weapon that had been used against him, and like any spent weapon, he discarded her without a thought. Her influencer career, built on fantasy, was now in ashes, consumed by the reality of the scandal she had helped create. She was left alone on the curb, with her suitcase as a pariah in the digital world that had once been her kingdom. Arthur's ride into Manhattan was surreal. His own name was everywhere, on news tickers on the front pages of the New York Post, and the Daily News being sold on street corners. The headlines were brutal: Vanderbilt for betrayal, pregnant wife in bed, billionaire in Paris. They had photos of Genevieve beautiful and serene from a past gala next to the infamous cafe selfie of Katerina. The narrative Annalise Dubois had so carefully crafted had taken root. He wasn't just an adulterer. He was a monster. When he walked into the Vandercorp boardroom, the atmosphere was glacial. The 10 board members, men and women he had known for years, whose children's weddings he had attended, looked at him as if he were a stranger. David Chen stood at the head of the table, his expression a mask of professional regret. Arthur David began, his voice flat. The damage is catastrophic. We've lost 12% of our market cap in 36 hours. The Sovereign Wealth Fund of Abu Dhabi has frozen their investment in the London project, pending a leadership review. Lenders for the Dubai refinancing are invoking the material adverse change clause. Your personal actions have become a direct and untenable threat to this company. Arthur tried to fight. He blustered about a hostile media campaign about personal privacy. He tried to wield the power and authority that had always been his default setting, but the faces staring back at him were unmoved. There's the matter of your employment contract. Arthur, a board member, a stern woman named Helen, interjected, sliding a document across the polished mahogany table. Specifically, the morality clause. Section 11, paragraph B. Engaging in conduct that brings the company into public disrepute or scandal. I think you'll agree this qualifies. He was checkmated. They weren't just angry. They were protecting their own investments. His personal brand, once Vanderkorp's greatest asset, was now its most toxic liability. The vote was a mere formality. He was asked to tender his resignation, effective immediately. If he refused, he would be terminated with cause, stripping him of his multi-million-dollar severance package. He stared at the resignation letter they had already prepared for him. In the space of 72 hours, he had gone from titan to outcast. With a numb hand, he signed his name, surrendering the empire he had built. He left the building through a back service elevator to avoid the phalanx of reporters camped out front. He took a taxi, a humbling experience in itself, to the penthouse. His keycard didn't work. The electronic lock flashed red, denying him entry to his own home. He buzzed the intercom, and a voice he didn't recognize, one of the nurses, no doubt politely informed him that Mrs. Vanderbilt was not accepting visitors, and that any further attempts to make contact should go through her lawyer. A box of his personal effects, she added, would be sent to a location of his choosing. Defeated, he checked into a hotel under a false name. It was then that the email arrived. It was from Annalise Dubois. Attached was the initial divorce filing. It was a masterpiece of legal warfare. It cited infidelity, but the core of the complaint was extreme emotional cruelty, endangering the health of the mother and unborn child. It demanded sole ownership of the Fifth Avenue penthouse, the Hamptons estate, and a staggering percentage of his liquid assets. It also petitioned for sole legal and physical custody of their unborn child, with any potential visitation for Arthur to be supervised, and at the sole discretion of Genevieve. The document was designed to utterly annihilate him, not just financially, but as a father. Desperate and cornered, he managed to get Genevieve on the phone. He had expected tears, screaming a dramatic confrontation. He got something far worse. "Genevieve, please," he began, his voice raspy. "We can talk about this. Don't do this. Don't let these lawyers do this to us." Her voice, when it came, was as cool and clear as ice water. "There is no us, Arthur. There is me, and there is my child. The one you gambled with for a week of Parisian entertainment. You didn't just cheat. You were willing to risk his life for your own selfish pleasure. Did you even think about us once while you were there?" "Of course he started, but the lie died in his throat. He hadn't. Not really. "No, you didn't," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "You thought I was weak, isolated, and powerless. You underestimated me. That was your fatal mistake. You built your entire world on an image of strength and integrity. I didn't destroy it, Arthur. I just held up a mirror. Everything you see crumbling around you is your own creation." There was a click, and the line went dead. The fall was swift and total. He was socially ostracized. Friends stopped returning his calls. Invitations dried up. He was a cautionary tale whispered about at the galas and charity balls he could no longer attend. He sold off assets to pay the lawyers and prepare for the inevitable brutal settlement. The world he had commanded now viewed him with a mixture of pity and contempt. He was no longer Arthur Vanderbilt, the Titan. He was just a man who had everything and threw it all away. 6 months later, the last of the winter snow had melted from Central Park, and the first green shoots of spring were pushing their way through the damp earth. The view from the Vanderbilt penthouse was one of rebirth and renewal, and for the first time in nearly a year, Genevieve Vanderbilt felt it mirrored the landscape of her own life. In her arms, she held her daughter, Serafina. The baby had been born 7 weeks prior, healthy and strong after a scheduled C-section that went off without a hitch. The high-risk pregnancy had ended not in disaster, but in this small, perfect miracle. Serafina had a full head of dark hair like Arthur's, but she had Genevieve's calm, observant eyes. The divorce had been finalized a month ago. Annalise Dubois had been as promised a surgeon. The settlement was decisive and overwhelmingly in Genevieve's favor. She retained the penthouse and the Hamptons beach house. More importantly, she was awarded a significant block of non-voting shares in Vandercorp, which combined with the liquid assets from the settlement made her an independently wealthy woman by any measure. As she had demanded, she was granted sole custody of Serafina. Arthur was permitted supervised visitation once a month in a neutral location, a right he had yet to exercise. He had become a ghost in their lives, a name on a birth certificate, and nothing more. Vandercorp had stabilized under David Chen's leadership. The board had successfully rebranded the scandal as the unfortunate actions of a single rogue executive, and with Arthur gone, investor confidence had slowly returned. His name had been quietly removed from the company's letterhead and the lobby of the building he had built. Genevieve could have retreated into her gilded cage, a wealthy divorcee, raising her daughter in quiet seclusion. But the woman who had survived the betrayal was not the same woman who had entered it. She was stronger, more purposeful. The ordeal had revealed to her a reserve of strength she never knew she possessed. She converted Arthur's cavernous home office, once the command center of his global empire, into the headquarters for her new project, the Serafina Foundation. With an initial endowment from her own settlement, the foundation's mission was to provide financial support, legal aid, and mental health resources for women experiencing high-risk pregnancies without adequate support systems. Her story, once a source of private pain and public humiliation, was now her greatest asset. She gave one and only one interview to a respected national magazine. She spoke not of the affair or the betrayal, but of the profound isolation and vulnerability of her experience and her desire to ensure other women in similar medical crises would never feel as alone as she had. She was no longer just Mrs. Vanderbilt, the spurned wife. She was Genevieve Ainsworth, using her mother's maiden name for the foundation, a philanthropist and advocate, a woman who had taken the rubble of her old life and used it to build a new foundation, one of purpose and compassion. One crisp April afternoon, as she was pushing Serafina's stroller through the park, a simple act of freedom that felt like the greatest luxury in the world, she saw him. Arthur was sitting on a bench across the pond, staring at the water. He looked smaller, diminished. The tailored suit was gone, replaced by a rumpled blazer. The aura of power that had once surrounded him like an electric field had vanished. He was just a man, graying and tired, watching the world go on without him. He didn't see her. She was just another young mother, with her baby anonymous in the bustling life of the city he once believed he owned. Genevieve paused for a moment, a flicker of something not pity, but a detached sense of closure passing through her. He had not been destroyed by a photo, or by her, or by a lawyer. He had been undone by a fundamental flaw in his own character, the belief that some people like his wife were merely objects to be managed, and that consequences were for everyone else. She adjusted the blanket around Serafina, turned the stroller, and walked away, leaving him behind with the ghosts of his fallen kingdom. She walked toward the sun, toward the sound of her daughter's soft breathing and the promise of a future she would build entirely on her own terms. Another year had passed. The city had cycled through the seasons once more, and the name Arthur Vanderbilt had faded from the headlines into the annals of corporate cautionary tales. For Genevieve, the passage of time had been a balm and a builder. The Serafina Foundation was no longer a fledgling project, but a celebrated and influential non-profit. She had become a prominent voice in maternal healthcare advocacy, her poise and intelligence shining in boardrooms and at fundraising galas. The tragic backstory of her foundation's origin, now just a footnote to its resounding success. Serafina was a toddler, a whirlwind of joyful energy with a vocabulary of delightful babble. The penthouse, once a silent prison, now echoed with her laughter and the pitter-patter of tiny feet. Genevieve had built a life of peaceful, purposeful happiness, a fortress so complete that she rarely, if ever, thought of the man who had nearly destroyed it all, until the email arrived from Annalise Dubois. It was a formal, legal notice. After 18 months of complete silence, Arthur Vanderbilt was petitioning to exercise his court-mandated visitation rights. He wanted to see his daughter. The news landed like a stone in the calm waters of her life. A part of her was furious, resentful that he could reappear and disrupt the peace she had fought so hard to create. Another deeper part felt a cold, weary resignation. It was his legal right. This day was always a possibility, a loose thread she had hoped would remain forever unwoven. "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" Sophie had asked, her voice tight with concern. "I can come with you." "No." Genevieve had replied, her own voice steadier than she felt. "This is something I have to do. For me, and for her." The visitation was scheduled to take place in a neutral, court-approved family center in Midtown. The room was aggressively bland, painted a generic beige with scuff marks along the baseboards. It contained a small table, a few uncomfortable chairs, and a box of worn-out children's toys in the corner. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and despair. It was a place stripped of personal history, designed for fractured families to meet under a watchful eye. Genevieve sat in one of the chairs, holding Serafina in her lap. Her daughter, oblivious, was happily chewing on a soft giraffe. A court-appointed supervisor, a kindly-looking woman named Mrs. Gable, sat discreetly by the door, pretending to be absorbed in some paperwork. The door opened, and Arthur walked in. The change in him was more profound than the last time she had seen him from a distance in the park. He had lost the last vestiges of his former power. His suit, though still expensive, seemed to hang off his frame. There were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights or joyless days. The arrogance that had been his defining feature was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. He looked like a man perpetually braced for a blow. His eyes found Genevieve first a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Shame, resentment, fear. Then his gaze dropped to the child in her arms, to his daughter. He stopped a few feet away, looking utterly lost. This was a scenario for which his life of corporate takeovers and ruthless negotiation had left him completely unprepared. "Genevieve," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Arthur?" She replied, her tone cool and even. She held Serafina a little tighter. He took a hesitant step forward. "She's beautiful." "Yes, she is." An awkward, heavy silence filled the room. Arthur's eyes darted around the sterile space, as if looking for a script. He seemed to realize he was supposed to do something to say something more. "I wanted to apologize." He finally managed, his gaze fixed on a point on the wall just over her shoulder. "For everything. What I did, It was unforgivable. I was a fool. I lost everything that mattered because I was arrogant and broken. Genevieve listened to the words. They were the correct words, the ones a person says in a situation like this. But they felt rehearsed, a speech delivered by a man who had analyzed his failure like a bad business deal and was now presenting his findings. It lacked the raw, messy agony of true remorse. "An apology doesn't change anything, Arthur," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It doesn't erase the risk you took. It doesn't give me back the months of terror I lived in. It's just words." "I know," he said quickly. "I know. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I want to be a part of her life. If you'll let me, I'll do whatever you say. I'll follow any rule." He looked at Serafina again, and for the first time a genuine emotion broke through his guarded exterior. It was a look of profound, devastating loss. He was seeing in the flesh the life he had thrown away, the connection he had severed before it had even begun. He wasn't just a disgraced CEO. He was a father who was a stranger to his own child. He held out a small, clumsily wrapped gift. "I brought this for her." Genevieve took the gift. It was a silver rattle from Tiffany's, a classic, expensive, impersonal choice. It was the kind of gift a man like the old Arthur would have an assistant buy. She didn't offer it to Serafina. "This isn't about gifts, Arthur," she said, placing it on the table. "This is about showing up, consistently, quietly, without drama. It's about her, not about assuaging your guilt." She stood up, settling Serafina on her hip. "Our hour is almost up. Mrs. Gable has the schedule for the next visit. If you choose to come, we will be here." She had walked in here with a knot of anxiety in her stomach, afraid that seeing him, hearing him, would reopen the old wounds. But as she looked at the broken man standing before her, she felt nothing but a distant, clinical clarity. The monster she had feared was gone. In his place was just a sad, empty man, trapped in the wreckage of his own making. He held no power over her. The rage was gone, the heartbreak was a distant scar, and her fear had been replaced by a formidable protective calm. She gave him a final dismissive nod and walked toward the door, her daughter nestled safely in her arms. She didn't look back. Stepping out of the stale air of the visitation center and into the bright, crisp autumn afternoon felt like surfacing for air. The meeting had not been a disruption to her peace. It had been its final confirmation. He was a chapter she had finished reading long ago, and her new story, the one that truly mattered, was just beginning. The story of Genevieve and Arthur Vanderbilt serves as a chilling modern-day fable. It's a testament to the fact that in our hyper-connected world, a person's carefully constructed image can be shattered in an instant. Genevieve's quiet strength and strategic mind prove that power isn't always loud. Sometimes the most devastating move is the one your opponent never sees coming. She didn't just get revenge. She reclaimed her life and built something meaningful from the ashes. What do you think was the biggest mistake Arthur made? Was it the affair itself, or underestimating the woman he married?
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.